SuperMonkeyBall is a franchise that, at its core, is about a monkey in a ball, rolling, falling, and collecting bananas. But don't let the simple premise fool you. For a brief moment in gaming history, SuperMonkeyBall was insanely successful. From its arcade cabinet origins to its breakout success on the Nintendo GameCube, the game became a cult classic, spawning sequels, spin-offs, and a passionate community of speedrunners and high-score chasers. Yet despite early triumphs and critical acclaim, the series slowly faded from the spotlight, plagued by missteps, creative fatigue, and the shifting priorities of its creators. Today, after a roller coaster of remasters, reboots, and questionable gimmicks, SuperMonkeyBall finds itself in limbo, a beloved but nearly forgotten relic of gaming's past. So what happened to SuperMonkeyBall? How did a franchise that once redefined arcade-style fun end up struggling to stay relevant? This is the story of SuperMonkeyBall's rise, fall, and uncertain future. For this one, we have to go all the way back to 1984, probably the furthest we've ever gone back to discuss the death of a video game franchise on this channel. At this time, Atari released a technically impressive and extremely successful game called Marble Madness, not on any console, but actually as an arcade cabinet. The game was beloved by arcade goers at the time, and it was quickly ported over to basically every platform available within the next year. While the game was simple and compared to the biggest titles of today, it looks quite archaic, it was made entirely by an extremely small team led by a guy named Mark Cerny. In the game, you simply guide a marble along towards the finish line in as quick of a time as possible without rolling off. But from a technical standpoint, the game really stood out as it was the first Atari game developed in the C programming language. It featured a trackball as a controller, included complex physics simulations like acceleration, friction, and momentum, and was one of the first arcade games to utilize stereo sound design. The fact that this was accomplished by such a small team, at a time when developers had far fewer tools than they do today, was genuinely impressive, and it's no surprise that the game developed a cult following. While Marble Madness was a breakthrough success, Mark Cerny himself had mixed feelings about his time at Atari. He joined the company at just 17, and by age 20 had created his first hit with Marble Madness. However, Cerny found the work environment challenging. He was often assigned to multiple projects at once, with only a fraction ever reaching completion. This lack of focus and the pressure to quickly move from one game to another left him frustrated, ultimately motivating him to seek new opportunities elsewhere after his early success. And, well, Marble Madness faded into obscurity, never receiving a sequel. That is, until a little monkey would come in and shake things up nearly 15 years later. But we'll get back to that in a second. For now, we must first introduce you to another character in this story, Toshihiro Nagoshi. Nagoshi began his career at Sega in 1989, working as a designer on pioneering 3D games like Virtua Racer under Yu Suzuki. Although not the lead on the project, he played a crucial role in their development, which set the stage for his later successes. Over the next decade, Nagoshi often found himself restraining the ambitious visions of his superiors, particularly during the costly development of Shenmue, which became infamous for its massive $70 million plus budget and insane production challenges. Keep in mind, this $70 million budget equals out to over $130 million when adjusted for inflation in 2025, an insane number even by today's standards. But that's a story for another video as well. By the late 1990s, Sega was embroiled in a fierce rivalry with Nintendo, each company pushing the limits of hardware and software innovation in an escalating console war. However, Sega's repeated hardware failures led to financial instability and frequent changes in leadership. During this turbulent period, Sega's CEO questioned Nagoshi about the high cost of game development, essentially asking why games couldn't be made more cheaply. This attitude frustrated Nagoshi as it seemed to disregard the complexities and ambitions behind quality game creation. Annoyed by the demand for cheaper games, Nagoshi decided to prove a point. He set out to make a game that was simple, inexpensive, and quick to produce, resulting in a little game called Monkeyball. Before we watch that little monkey roll onto the scene, let's take a quick detour. Because while some games are all about guiding marbles or monkeys through wild obstacle courses, others let you carve your own path entirely. If you've ever wondered what it's like to step out of the ball and master your own destiny, you'll want to hear more about the Matchless Kung Fu, the sponsor of today's video. Imagine an open-world sandbox RPG set in a vibrant wuxia universe. That is, a world inspired by classic Chinese martial arts stories, where you can live out any martial arts fantasy, whether that's wandering the wilds as a lone hero or building up your own legendary sect. In The Matchless Kung Fu, every choice you make matters, with an innovative karma system where your actions in one life can impact the next. It's like Kenshi, but more chaotic and more, well, interesting. Like I'd say Kenshi, but with a bit of a Kung Fu background and a master's degree in Taoist philosophy. That is the Matchless Kung Fu for you. The world is alive and unpredictable. Every NPC has their own goals, leading to wild gameplay scenarios that can be hilarious, dramatic, or even dangerous. You can create and customize your own mini-worlds or explore massive pre-generated realms, each packed with unique resources and challenges. In combat? Oh, it's anything but ordinary. Build your skill deck in battle with a turn-based system that mixes strategy and rock, paper, scissors, or even win fights with clever verbal combat. Want to lead? You can found your own sect, recruit disciples, manage facilities, and send followers on missions. Tame animals with unique abilities, from monkeys that beg for money to snakes that pick locks. You can't make this stuff up. With the massive 1.3 update, the entire map is now open world, main quests have been revamped, and sect management is deeper than ever. Plus, the Steam Workshop and mod tools offer tons of funny mods and endless ways to customize your adventure. So grab the Matchless Kung Fu at a historic 30% discount from June 19th to July 10th. Just use my link in the description or pinned comment to get the best deal and support the channel. Now, let's get back to the early days of MonkeyBall. Rather than starting as a home console release, the first game in the franchise was also an arcade cabinet, only released in Japan. It was released on the 23rd of June 2001, complete with a questionable-looking banana joystick. The game revolved around tilting the stage itself with this joystick to roll your character, a monkey and a ball, towards the exit as quickly as possible while collecting bananas. It was weird and silly, but it was a lot of fun. The game physics and precision of the joystick allowed for an exceptionally high skill ceiling while still being accessible to newcomers. There were 3 difficulties to choose from, where you'd have to beat 10, 30, or 50 stages back to back. It was replayable, it was competitive, and it was very clearly inspired by Marble Madness, taking everything that shined in that game and bringing it into a more modern format, complete with more replayability and more depth. But it was still just an arcade cabinet that didn't really reach popularity until the home console port of the game came in September of 2001, this time called SuperMonkeyBall. The title was released on the Nintendo GameCube and was actually the first Sega game released on a Nintendo console, which was a really big deal at the time. This new version took from the Japanese arcade cabinet and added some new bells and whistles, like a 4th playable character called Gon, a practice and competition mode, 3 party games, 3 minigames, and an expanded secret master difficulty. This release really allowed fans to sink their teeth into the competitive aspect of the game, encouraging players to continuously replay the game while aiming for new high scores and records. Now you can improve your skill and master each individual stage from the comfort of your bedroom with practice mode and get good enough to try Expert 40, which, no joke, is one of the hardest levels in gaming history. This level and the countless other easy-to-learn, hard-to-master levels are a great example of the high skill ceiling found in SuperMonkeyBall, a ceiling that cultivated a community of deeply dedicated fans that continue to compete to beat high scores even today. But the beautiful thing about SuperMonkeyBall was that you didn't have to be competitive. If you just wanted to goof around with your friends, you could race each other in stages in competition mode or play the party games together. The game was truly unlike anything that came before it, and fans loved it. Toshihiro Nagoshi set out to prove that a simple, inexpensive game could still succeed, and he was right. SuperMonkeyBall became a commercial and critical triumph, and by August of 2002, the game had sold 105,000 units in North America alone, making it one of Sega's best-selling titles in the United States at the time. While it underperformed in Japan with just 72,000 units sold, its overseas success far exceeded expectations and helped to establish the franchise. So of course, Sega wanted sequels. When SuperMonkeyBall 2 launched for Nintendo GameCube on August 25, 2002, anticipation was high after the surprise success of the original. This title did quite a bit to improve the original formula while still sticking to its roots. It introduced a new story mode with 100 levels spread across 10 worlds, each featuring animated cutscenes, and allowing players to tackle stages in any order with unlimited retries. This was a significant shift from the original challenge mode, which had a strict life system and linear progression. Super Monkey Ball 2 also enhanced its gameplay with more interactive and strategic level design, adding switches that could move platforms or alter obstacles, making the experience more puzzle-oriented compared to the pure skill focus of the first game. There were also enhanced graphics and effects, better sound design, and an expansion of the multiplayer experience, with 6 new minigames being added, bringing the total up to 12. Super Monkey Ball 2 sold quite well and also had great critical reception, which really bode well for the future of the series. So of course, a handheld title debuted on the Game Boy Advance on November 19, 2002, called Super Monkey Ball Jr. A lot of cuts had to be made for this game to work, but despite the limitations, it was a really great port and the visuals were pretty impressive for a handheld at the time, featuring actual 3D. It was received mostly positively and did a good job at what it set out to do, making Monkey Ball accessible for handheld players. But while the Super Monkey Ball franchise was expanding, Sega's financial troubles were finally coming to a head. As a result of this, Sammy Corporation agreed to merge with Sega in 2004. This naturally meant that many teams and departments would be restructured, which included Amusement Vision, the developers of Super Monkey Ball. On its own, this might not have actually changed very much for the series, but during this shift in the company, Nagoshi wanted to pitch an entirely new game, one that would change the entire course of his career. Given the wacky nature of Monkey Ball, you'd assume that Nagoshi had another similarly bizarre idea in mind for his next game, but that wasn't the case. He wanted to create a serious Japanese crime game with dark undertones in a gritty atmosphere called Like a Dragon, or as it's better known in the West, Yakuza. Yes, this is the same Yakuza where you sing karaoke, play baseball, and spend literally billions of dollars fixing up toy cars to beat little kids in races. But the series actually started out much more serious and dark than its modern sequels would make you think. Small world. Anyways, he had a difficult time pitching Yakuza to Sega as the higher-ups feared that there wouldn't be an audience for such a mature game. This led to Nagoshi kind of just forcing his way into getting it greenlit by sneaking gameplay of it into upcoming previews of Sega titles. It ruffled some feathers, but the CEO liked what he saw, so it was begrudgingly approved. From there, the making of the first game was pretty troubled. It was pretty rough on company morale and led to a bunch of people quitting over the multi-year development process, but eventually the game got over the finish line and was released in 2005 to generally positive reception. And over 1 million copies were sold by 2006, making it a massive commercial success for Sega. Suddenly, it seemed like Sega might finally have a new lucrative franchise that they could milk 22 titles out of over the next 20 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The unexpected success of Yakuza required Nagoshi to shift his focus away from Monkey Ball and dedicate more attention to the new franchise. However, Sega still wanted to continue producing Monkey Ball games too. For a time, Nagoshi and the team at Amusement Vision, now rebranded to New Entertainment R&D Department due to the merger with Sammy Corporation that I mentioned earlier, attempted to manage both projects at once, but as the next few Monkey Ball releases would show, splitting his efforts proved problematic. The first of these releases was Super Monkey Ball Deluxe, which came out on March 15, 2005 for the Xbox and PlayStation 2. Deluxe was a compilation of content from the first 2 games, plus new stages and features such as the notoriously challenging Ultimate Mode. While Nagoshi was still closely associated with the franchise and his studio within Sega led its development, his hands-on involvement was limited with this game. He wasn't credited as director for Deluxe, and his oversight appears to have been at a higher supervisory level, rather than direct creative control. Despite this, Deluxe was well received by fans for its content, and it was seen as a solid remaster, even if it wasn't a completely new entry. This sentiment would quickly change, however, with Super Monkey Ball Touch and Roll, which launched on the Nintendo DS on December 1st, 2005. Unlike Deluxe, Nagoshi was actually credited as both producer and director for Touch and Roll, meaning that he had direct creative control and oversight responsibility for the project. However, the game's shift to a stylus and D-pad control scheme on the DS, the absence of challenge modes and difficulty settings, and a reliance on recycled content led to a lukewarm reception and mixed reviews. Both of these new games were solid, but they didn't really do it for Sega the way that the original two titles did. Sega wanted something more, and with Nagoshi and the team at New Entertainment R&D deep into the development of Yakuza 2, they needed to find a new partner to develop the next Super Monkey Ball title. So they partnered with Traveler's Tales, the masterminds behind the original LEGO Star Wars games that we talked about in a past video, which will be linked in the description. Anyways, this new title was aimed at changing the formula and turning Super Monkey Ball into something bigger by moving away from purely puzzle-based arcade-style stages and into a more expansive, story-driven adventure. It was supposed to be Super Monkey Ball on steroids, and it would bring the franchise into a new golden age, or set it up to eventually die altogether. Super Monkey Ball Adventure released June 2nd, 2006 for PlayStation 2, GameCube, and PlayStation Portable, and was a story-driven adventure featuring large hub worlds, NPCs, and fetch quests. It took the entire gameplay loop from pretty much every other Monkey Ball game ever released and threw it out the window in favor of a platforming experience. But if you recall, your character is in a rolling ball that uses momentum to move, and navigating tight, walled mazes and jumping around platforms using a movement system like this was genuinely one of the most unenjoyable experiences imaginable. Because of this weird gameplay loop and dynamic, Super Monkey Ball Adventure received mixed to negative reviews, with Metacritic scores ranging from a 53 to a 56 across platforms, and many reviewers calling it the worst entry in the series. Sales were disappointing as well. The game sold only about 150,000 copies worldwide, with 120,000 in North America and 30,000 in Europe, and failed to even chart in Japan. These figures paled in comparison to the franchise's overall success, marking Adventure as a notable commercial and critical misstep for Super Monkey Ball. Then, Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz released on the Wii on November 19, 2006. This was the final game directed by Nagoshi, and with the recent mediocre reception of the last few releases, this one really needed to be a hit to save the franchise. And given that motion controls were all the rage with the release of the Wii, the developers weren't shy about using them. While this had the potential to revolutionize the experience, it yet again created a worse version of the first few Super Monkey Ball games, with some new features tacked on. With this release, it seemed as if Super Monkey Ball had officially lost its vision and had instead focused on milking any last relevance out of the franchise in a mad dash for a hit. There were over 50 party games in this title, the most of any title in the franchise to date. Quite a few minigames were good, but also just as many sucked. The main game had 10 worlds, 10 stages each, with the first 8 worlds containing bosses at the end, a mechanic that was unique to this game. You could also jump, which was another new feature. For casual players, the game was pretty beloved, barring a rough difficulty curve, but for veterans who grew up on the first few Monkey Ball games, they hated it. It pretty much boiled down to the forced motion controls, and this wasn't the first time that the developers had so blatantly disregarded precision for gimmicky new controls and the urge to innovate on a formula that was designed for a specific type of experience, and it was creating problems for Super Monkey Ball. The team tried to make up for it by adding new and exciting features, but these also ended up being gimmicky, leading to Banana Blitz being mediocre not only with its gameplay, but also with its performance. It did sell 350,000 copies in the United States and just 38,000 in Japan, and while these numbers aren't bad, it really was a shell of what it should have been. It seemed like Sega was trying to do anything to maintain relevance when the series had already been exhausted and there wasn't much else that they could do with the concept. And to make matters worse, Banana Blitz was the last Super Monkey Ball game that Nagoshi had led creatively, as he now began to focus fully on the Yakuza series. So now, with no exciting prospects, series fatigue, and a grim outlook, Super Monkey Ball would also be losing the person who spearheaded development on the entire series. What happened next? Well, isn't surprising. Super Monkey Ball Step and Roll released on the Wii February 9th, 2010. The gimmick this time was the ability to control the game with the Wii balance board. Do I even need to say how bad of an idea that is? The game had bland level design, credits playing after every single world, only 70 levels to play, no challenge mode again, fewer party games than Banana Blitz, and genuinely one of the dumbest control schemes of any game that I've ever seen. It flopped so badly that it wasn't even mentioned by Sega in any of their annual revenue reports from around this time, and reviews were again mediocre. In 2012, Super Monkey Ball Banana Splits was released for the PlayStation Vita, and it only sold 3,000 copies in its first week in Japan, and a negligible amount in the United States. It seemed as if the Super Monkey Ball series was as good as dead, and it was surprising that Sega was even continuing to release more titles. The original creator had moved on to focus on Yakuza, reviews and sales were rapidly declining, and a good Super Monkey Ball game hadn't been released since 2005. So it was time to shut it all down. But, well, Sega never really said anything else. They never retired the series, made any announcements, or addressed any of the concerns from the hardcore fans. They just went radio silent. Until, well, a disaster struck over 7 years later. During the 2010s, Sega was actively re-releasing and remastering classic titles from its extensive back catalog, a strategy aimed at capitalizing on nostalgia and expanding its digital sales footprint across modern platforms. This trend wasn't unique to Sega because the entire industry was experiencing a resurgence of interest in remasters and remakes around this time, and Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz, despite its mixed legacy, represented a recognizable and marketable brand, as its Wii-era assets were recent enough to be upscaled and adapted for HD platforms without the need for a full, ground-up remake. So basically, as a way to say, screw it, let's give it a try and see if we make money, Sega greenlit a remaster of Banana Blitz called Banana Blitz HD in February of 2019, and the team had just 6 months to develop and release the project. While fans and critics often question why Banana Blitz, as opposed to the more beloved GameCube originals, was selected for the HD treatment, the answer came down to technical and budgetary constraints. The original Super Monkey Ball and its sequel would have required much more extensive work to remake, given their age and the need for significant asset overhauls. Banana Blitz, though, being a Wii title, had more modern assets and a structure that could be more easily adapted for current platforms, making it a more practical choice for a quick turnaround. Banana Blitz HD came out on October 29, 2019, complete with graphical improvements, an ability to use a joystick instead of motion controls, and a couple small new modes. You could also now play as Sonic the Hedgehog, who replaced bananas with rings, which was cool, I guess. But the positives pretty much ended there. There were only 10 party games, down from 50, which would have been fine if they were all good, but they weren't. The boss fights still sucked, and the difficulty curve was still pretty rough. So ultimately, it was a remake that failed to address half the issues of the original game, and their reviews reflected it. While a disappointment to many, it did at least open the path for future titles, so there was still hope. As stated by the new director of the Super Monkey Ball franchise, Masao Shisho, I don't know how to say this. If there's enough support for Banana Blitz HD, this will open up doors for remaking the first two games or even a whole new title to the series. So how did the game do, and did it manage to reintroduce Super Monkey Ball to new audiences? Well, not really. It was yet another unexciting title that nobody really cared about, and with yet another batch of mediocre reception, it was clear that the passion just still wasn't there. But it must have given Sega some hope, because just 2 years later, Banana Mania released on October 5th, 2021. It was another remaster, this time of Super Monkey Ball Deluxe. And surprisingly, Sega did something right for once. This new title introduced a frankly overwhelming number of characters to play as, including some DLC characters like Hello Kitty or literal Sega consoles, and a ton of new game modes. You could play stages in reverse, and there were new accessibility features and customization options. It was a lot of content, all with a shiny coat of paint, and for the most part, it was a step up from the last zillion uninspired and bland Super Monkey Ball games. It received Metacritic review scores in the 70s, the highest since the early days of the franchise, and it sold decently well too, since it was the first Super Monkey Ball game released on the Nintendo Switch. Things were trending upwards, and Sega was starting to see the value of Super Monkey Ball, particularly on this new console. So they doubled down, and on June 25th, 2024, Banana Rumble came out exclusively for the Switch. And it was the first truly new Monkey Ball game in 12 whole years, since the last few games were quick remasters or ports to older consoles. The game boasted an impressive 220 stages, which is almost as much as the first two games combined, and more new stages than any other game introduced. There was online play for battle games, as well as support for up to 16 players within them. There were extensive customization options for your character and ball, assist options, and 12 different characters to play as. Unlike past games, these each had different gameplay stats, adding a slight level of strategy to who you picked. 11 DLC characters were also released, with one pack largely being the Sonic crew, and the other included Godzilla, the crewmate, Hatsune Miku, Pac-Man, and Red from Angry Birds. And on top of all of this, there was even more content added through updates, so there is a lot to offer here. Due to all of this new stuff helping to breathe new life into a dying series, it was received quite well, and should have been the perfect game to keep Super Monkey Ball going for the next decade, right? Well, not quite. First of all, the game's marketing and branding was extremely confusing, and the trailers that were released didn't do a good job at explaining who the game was for and what it did to enhance the series. It's undeniably the best Super Monkey Ball game since the original 2 releases, but it was named Banana Rumble, with the last few games being named Banana Blitz, Banana Splits, and Banana Mania. The scale of what this game actually accomplished was dwarfed by the confusing branding and lack of promotion, and because of this, the game didn't sell very well. It had modest success in North America and was pretty much a complete flop everywhere else. So once again, Super Monkey Ball sits in limbo, and we don't really know what comes next. But to many, the series has been considered dead for over a decade, and I personally agree. I'm not a big fan of the way that Sega milks some of their most popular franchises, and this is yet another one where I feel that they should pump the brakes and move on to other things. But hey, that's just me. Let me know how you feel in the comments. Thanks to the Yakuza series' overwhelming success for the past 2 decades, Monkey Ball clearly is no longer on the list of priorities for Sega, but it's still well respected, and even after a rough patch, is still remembered fondly by its fans. Did you ever play any of the Monkey Ball games? Which ones did you like? Did I miss anything crucial in this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. You can also find our sources down there, so the next time that Internet Anarchist publishes the exact same video as me, you can see that he basically just used AI to summarize my research that the team and I spent hours working on. It's fun, so compare his Little Big Planet video with mine side by side and you'll see a lot of resemblance. But that's a story for another time. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you next time, and peace.